What a time to be alive. Hello and welcome to Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta Journal's digital editor, and I am so excited to invite you to a conversation today with Joanna Ebenstein, who is going to talk to us about morbid anatomy. This is Lydia Horn, who works with us at Alta, has recently written an article about Morbid Anatomy, an online journal and community created by Joanna that aims to explore, normalize, befriend death, complete with a library in Brooklyn and live events. Morbid Anatomy examines death through multiple perspectives, from medical to artistic. She has a new book, Memento Mori, The Art of Contemplating Death to Live a Better Life. And that book presents a step-by-step guide to embracing one's mortality. Today, she's going to be speaking with Alta senior editor, Matt Haber, about Memento Mori, her new book, Morbid Anatomy, and this upcoming event in LA. Now, just while I have you, and I'm going to remind you at the end, we have if you want to go to this fabulous event, which I wish I could go to, Matt will be there. We have a discount code for tickets, and we're going to pop that in the chat. So keep your eyes peeled for that. You get 20% off your ticket to the Morbid Anatomy event in LA with the special code. So we're going to send you an email with that. We're going to send you an email to Lydia's article all about morbid anatomy, and anything else that pops up in the conversation today. Before we begin, it is my pleasure and my job to tell you a little bit about Alta Journal. Alta is an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. We have, first of all, an incredible, big, beautiful magazine. In fact, our new issue comes out in October, so right around the corner. Now's a great time to subscribe. We offer free events like this every Wednesday. We host the monthly California Book Club, which is the third Thursday of every month. And you can subscribe, you can become a member of Alta for $50 a year. $50 gets you 4 gorgeous issues. We've got a little gift for you of a book of our Altitudes, every cartoon that has appeared in the first 5 years of Alta, and access to all of our digital archives. So if you enjoy what we do here, if you're interested in supporting independent journalism and cool events like this, a beautiful magazine, I really hope you will consider joining Alta Journal as a member. All right, my spiel is over. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can ask your questions for Joanna. There's also a chat. And if you're a regular here at Alta Live, we love to see where you're zooming in from. So let us know where you're watching from today. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. Again, it'll be in that email we shoot you later. So eyes peeled for that. I will pop back at the end of the conversation with questions on your behalf. So hey, Azusa, Pasadena, Carpinteria, San Marcos, Texas, Ukiah, California. Welcome, everyone. So again, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Joanna, and I will see you at the end. Take it away, Matt.
Thanks, Beth. I can't believe you resisted referring to this show as Alta Death for this one, but you can hear the laughter in the crowd. Joanna, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it is my pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about the origins of Morbid Anatomy. You've been doing it for how long?
Yeah, so Morbid Anatomy started in 2007 in the olden days when we did blogs, the days before podcasts. And
Yay, oldie times.
yeah, some of you might not have heard of them. They were, well, you all know what a blog is. So I started a blog basically in support of a photographic project that I was doing called Anatomical Theater, which was a exhibit which was about medical museums around the world in Europe and the United States. And when I was putting together all of my research, I found that I was using these links again and again and again, links to medical museums or online exhibits or research kind of portals that I was using. And there was no place that gathered them in one place. So that was kind of what I tried to do for my own research use. And
We should just back it up and say you were a photographer and an artist who was traveling around photographing these medical museums all over the world.
Yeah, and so for those of you who don't know what a medical museum, you might have heard of the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. That's probably the most famous in the United States. So these are museums that show human remains, preserved human remains, or models that depict human remains in order to teach medical students. But they're also, I saw them as really kind kind of like unintentional artworks about death and the
Hmm.
ambivalence of embodiment. And that's what I was trying to present through this project. And so, yeah, so I started this blog, and it also included a bibliography, which were the books that I'd collected while
Hmm.
doing my research. And people began almost immediately to start sending me emails and asking if they could access the books in my collection. So then I started the Morbid Anatomy Library, which was an open to the public library. Then we started doing events and lectures. I think, Matt, you came to some of those early
We
ones
came
at
to a couple of those.
Harvard,
These were
right?
in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
and they ran the gamut. You had stuff about UFOs, you had stuff about cryptozoology. You were just kind of an antenna picking up all kinds of weird frequencies, and you had a great community.
Yeah, yeah. And so we were doing all these events in this space, and we were kind of outgrowing that space. And that's when I met this woman named Tracy Hurley Martin, who since has passed. So I just
Hmm.
want to say hello, Tracy, wherever you might be. Tracy kind of saw the potential in the project, and she said, I think this would make a great cafe and shop. And I said, I could build a great museum to go with that. And then that started this chain of conversations that led to an actual museum in Brooklyn, New York, which I'm sure you visited between 2014 and 2016. And then when that ended, because unfortunately it was not financially sustainable, we kind of became what we are now, which is an online, mostly
Hmm.
online project. We do classes, we do lectures, we do pop-ups with organizations around the world and trips and all sorts of things as well. Monday night lecture series. We have an online journal. And as you mentioned, it's a community. I think above all things, it's this group of people who are linked by an interest in something that most people think is really weird. And it's a place where
Hmm.
you don't have to feel weird talking about this.
Yeah, I think when I think about what you do, I realize that you were way ahead of the curve on some of this stuff. I just saw an article in the style section of the New York Times about these kind of hipster mortuaries. And
Mm.
there's been a lot of art books and pieces by people who are kind of embracing our relationship to death and not being disgusted or afraid. And you were way ahead of this. So how does it feel to see the culture kind of catching up to the thing that you were doing?
It feels wonderful. I feel like the reason all of us had to start working with this material is we were living in a culture, less so, but still, I'd say, that is taking a part of death, a part of life rather, that is going to happen to all of us and kind of pretending it doesn't exist,
Hmm.
which I just don't think is healthy. So, I'm very interested in the ideas of Carl Jung. And what Carl Jung says is one thing in art that artists do, and by artists meaning writers, podcasters, all of us creatives out there in the world, is we're finding kind of instinctively the places, the shadow of our culture, with the things we're not talking about, the things we're repressing in an attempt to create wholeness in a sense. So I think the fact that so many people are interested in this is because it had to happen, like basically there's a huge part of human experience, if you look at it as like a yin yang, right? Like it's all life and like this little tiny bit of death, but that's not what life is, right?
Hmm.
It's just not, it doesn't reflect the true lived experience, and we all lose people, and there's really so little to help us
Hmm.
because of the way we've dealt with death.
And you've traveled around and you live now in Mexico. So how are different cultures dealing with this differently than maybe in the United States or in
Yeah.
particular the Western part of the United States that Alta represents?
um I think the western part of the United States, having lived in the eastern and western, is a little better than the eastern because
Mm.
I think we have Mexican culture that is so much a part of our lives. Um, but in other places like Mexico or Bolivia, places I've spent a lot of time, or Hungary, I often say the idea of denying death is a luxury unique to our time and place. And I don't think other countries have had that luxury, So if you listen to the Hungarian national anthem anytime, you will see they're really looking at a lot of the dark things that happen in their culture. Mexico, we all know, famously deals with death with Day of the Dead and all sorts of
Hmm.
other rituals. I think in the United States and the affluent Western world, we are in a situation where, for various reasons that we can go into if you'd like, we are able to deny death. And that's partially why we see it here.
And when you mentioned the luxury of being able to ignore death or pretend that it's not going to happen to us, it made me think immediately of COVID. And I have not seen you since way before COVID, but how do you think that that couple of years of all of us isolated, who had the luxury to be isolated, but those of us who were at home stuck with our thoughts, how did that change, do you think, our relationship and understanding of death?
Well, I think what you're talking about, this kind of flowering of people writing about death, has to do with that. I think
Hmm.
that's a big part of it. I think it's the first time in our lives that we've had to confront death in that way. I
Yeah.
think our parents had to, they had the Bay of Pigs and all these things that
Well, they had the threat of nuclear war over them their whole childhood.
that too. And we kind of did, but it was a very different thing and a very abstract thing. And also just thinking about our grandparents, right? My grandparents went through the Holocaust, there was the Depression, like this, again, this luxury that life is just going to continue on being a rosy glow day after day is also unique to our generation, I think. So I think that COVID, it didn't change things as much as I was hoping, I would say. I remember when we were sitting at home and watching ecosystems start to rebound and thinking like, oh,
Right.
everyone's
The
gonna
nature
see
is
it.
healing meme that everyone loved then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really thought maybe we'd all just start working at home. And of course, some of us do now. It's definitely changed, but it seems like we've just kind of jumped back into the old ways, bigger and better, really, without having learned any real lessons. So
Mhm. So let's get a little biographical. You're a California kid and you have such a sunny disposition for somebody who's spent so much time thinking about death. Tell me how this started for you.
that's, people often ask me that, and there's no easy answer. But I'll tell you a few things. I will say that when I was a kid, I loved animals. I think a lot of people that I've met, a lot of women who are into this start this way as well. I loved animals. I wanted to be like a veterinarian or a
Mhm.
wildlife photographer when I grew up. And I would have pets and I would have little lizards and spiders and all sorts of things. Excuse me. And when my lizard would die, for example, I would then keep it in formaldehyde. And this was thanks to my father, how he did this pre-internet, I have no idea.
Mhm.
But he was
He
able to
somehow sourced formaldehyde.
he did, and so I was the geekiest kid you can imagine. But back then it would have been, I think, under the rubric of science geek. It's like
Mhm.
my family's friends would come over, and I'd come out with my parade of little dead animals. And I just thought
It's the original Morbid Anatomy library.
exactly, and I thought they were beautiful, and I still think they're beautiful. And I think that's kind of the beginning for a lot of people. Is I think, in my opinion, well, you're a father of a young person, so you can tell me what you think about this. But from my observation, I feel like all children are interested in death too, because it is beautiful until you've kind of been taught that it's repulsive in some way. That when I was little and I saw something decaying, all those beautiful blues and purples, and you're intrigued. So I feel like that's another answer I often say is I think all children are interested in death, and then at a certain point, we are it's kind of beaten out of us culturally, especially if you're
Mhm.
a girl. And I
Well, I
definitely
think
think,
that also, if you're interested in it for too long, you get slotted into a kind of stereotype category of like, you're a goth or you're depressed, or it's not integrated into a personality.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So I was always interested in that stuff. And I guess the other thing that I think is a big deal is that I would spend summers, even as a young person, with my paternal grandparents, who I was really close to, my father's parents. And they were Holocaust survivors, and they were also both doctors. And so I spent a lot of time looking at their illustrated medical books and just being completely fascinated by these depictions of the body. And because they'd both been trained as doctors, they were very no nonsense about death and the body
Mhm.
and injury too. Like if I got hurt, they're like, well, it's nothing, like if I were my parents, I'd be like, oh my God, oh my God. So they had a very different attitude. And then the Holocaust aspect, we knew it had happened, but we also weren't allowed to talk about it. So it kind of hung
Mm.
for everything in an interesting way. So what I often say is I think a lot of Jews might be closer, or the possibility of denying death might be less for Jews of a certain type because it's part of our family tree, genocide, my grandparents lost their family members in this crazy event. They lived in the United States because of this event. I would have been well, I wouldn't have existed because my parents would have
Mhm.
so it's a part of our lives in a different way. So I think it was always in my awareness. And also growing up in California, we can really focus on the California aspect here. I grew up in Concord, California, which is a suburb of San Francisco. Probably some of you know it. And it's a very sunny place in many
Mhm.
ways. And I feel like that doesn't reflect the lived experience of all of us, when you're depressed or you have, complicated family lives or the Holocaust in your family. That's not how I experienced life, is where everything's great and it's a giant smile,
Mhm.
you know? So I think that forces you to find your own way, if that makes sense.
So as you've been out front with this for going on, I guess, what, 15 years or so, like that, 14 years, what kind of resistance have you gotten from people? What do people say that's critical of what you're doing or your outlook?
I don't think people are critical to my face, but I will say people who are not part of the Morbid Anatomy community, there's a moment when I'm out with normal people that aren't part of our community, and they say, "What do you do?" And I always take a deep breath and I'm like, "Oh, here we go. How's this gonna go?" And as soon as I say what I do, I just kind of watch their face fall. That's
Because
morbid.
they must think that you're like some sicko, or they just think
Kind
the whole
of.
thing is uncomfortable.
I don't know. I've never really thought about it. I think they just think I'm weird, that I'm a freak. And certainly
But
that's
that's
some
a feature, not a bug.
I've embraced that at this point in my life.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me. And part of the beauty of the Morbid Anatomy community is I actually don't feel like a freak anymore because there are so many of
Mhm.
us. I know that now through all the classes I taught, through all the people that attend our other
Do you
classes.
have
And
some numbers? Do you know how many people have gone through your classes in the last
uh,
14-ish years?
I don't, Matt. I'm sorry. I can
That's
tell you
okay.
that they sell out again and again for certain
Hmm.
classes, and that I have now met some of these people. Some of these people will be in LA, and maybe you're out there right now. Um, Students that feel like friends, it's almost
Hmm.
like Morbid Anatomy sometimes feels like Morbid Academy is what we started calling it, and you're passing friends in the halls. There's a sense of yeah, of a shared interest that unifies us, and that um a place where we can talk about what we're really interested in without having to worry that people just think we're very strange.
Hmm. And I think one thing that's pretty cool about it is that you hung out this shingle, this blog, and it attracted an audience that, like, you were not thinking like, who's an underserved community that I can tap into? These people just kind of came to you.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about them gathering in LA. What's the plan for this weekend?
Yeah, so this weekend we are going to be celebrating the launch of a new book. So I have a book coming out, which is kind of the culmination of everything I've been doing since I started, since before I started Morbid Anatomy, really. All of my thoughts about death, all of my any, if you could call it wisdom that I've accrued about dealing with death, because I started at a place of probably more fear than I have now.
Hmm.
And we'll be doing excuse me, we're going to be gathering at a place called the Philosophical Research Society, which is this beautiful 1930s Mayan revival building I think in Los Feliz. And it was the work of a thinker, occultist writer called Manly P. Hall, who gathered all these great wisdom books from many different traditions. And they do wonderful events like pretty much every night. It has a real Morbid Anatomy,
Hmm.
like similar to Morbid Anatomy vibe,
It's
maybe
a
a
sister organization in a way.
exactly, which is why we wanted to do the event with them. So we're going to be gathering there at noon, and we will be doing 10 short talks, followed by an after party with DJs and a Phantasmagoria Magic Lantern show. And the next day, we're going to be doing offsite events at places like the Museum of Jurassic Technology, Hollywood Forever, and Vela Slavatsky's Panorama.
And I think the after party is the thing that I want to focus on for a moment, because I think that the events that I've gone to that you've done, they've always had this joy element. It's not standing around the Ouija
Huh.
board, with black candles. It's really you like to throw a dance party often. So tell me about where joy fits in with what you guys do.
Well, and I think that's the paradox at the heart of contemplating death that I'm really trying to explore in the book too, that it is by strangely or seemingly paradoxically to our culture, by keeping the idea of death close at hand, that is how we blossom and that is how we appreciate our lives, because the meaning of life is that it ends, is a quote by, oh goodness, it's one of the quotes I have in the book. I can't remember who's quoted. It might be Kafka. I can't remember, but
Some dead person.
it maybe I can't even remember that
Well,
person.
eventually
I
dead
think
person.
well, thank you, Matt. Yes, it's an event. And I mean, and I think your humor is exactly on point. It's like this is a reality that we could either sit around and lament, or it's something that we could look in the eye and make a relationship with, and maybe find something positive in that relationship, and find that by looking at the brevity of life, we can do the things we want to do with our time on earth, so we can live the truest life and the best life we can with the time we have. And my feeling is that by denying that, we end up just putting off life, or so many of us do.
Mm.
And I'm sure people like that too. And yes, joy is a big part of what we do. And I also feel like any other professional conference, right? You want to meet like-minded people, you want to meet each other. And so to me, the party is as important as the symposium. The symposium, people won't really have a chance to mix, but the after party, these people who've come in from all different places in the world can meet each other at last. And that's really one of the most important parts.
And I think LA is an interesting place to do this because it's kind of, in many ways, a city of ghosts and death. And the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where you're having some events, often has gatherings, joyful gatherings at what is a cemetery, but is also kind of a place for celebration. They do movies, they do other things, and LA seems to get this vibe. So tell me, are there other places that you would like to host similar type events? And are you planning
Yeah,
more?
I would love to. We do them in New York pretty much every other year, but I would love to do every other year somewhere else. So I would love to go back to San Francisco. That's where I'm from.
Mhm,
And to me, Morbid Anatomy is very much a San Francisco kind of aesthetic. I feel like, the kind of Victoriana, the interest in
mhm. The
spiritualism,
steampunkiness, that all
kind
that
of.
stuff.
I would say pre-steampunk. I'm a
Hmm.
little older than you. So, but when I was growing up there, it was more like yeah, like a fetishization of antiques and kind of
Hmm.
maybe going back to like the Haight Ashbury period and looking at
Hmm.
how they kind of had a revival of the 19th century. I'm not sure if that's where it comes from, but very much an interest in the ways people used to live. And I guess that was really the heyday of San Francisco
Hmm.
also, right? You think of Gold Rush and all of this. Um, so to me, I would love to do something in San Francisco because I feel like it just fits in so well there.
Yeah. So tell me, other than the book coming out and the event this weekend, any other stuff, Morbid Anatomy stuff on the horizon that is worth putting on our calendars and knowing about?
Yeah, we just launched today officially. We're doing one of the things Morbid Anatomy has been doing, and this was spearheaded by our colleague Salvador Alguin, who probably you met back in the day. He does all of our Death in Mexico stuff. He's from
Hmm.
Monterrey, Mexico. And when I met him many, many years ago, he proposed doing a trip for Morbid Anatomy to Mexico for Day of the Dead. And that was something we had to wait for a while to do. He really wanted to find the right time and the right place. But now we've done, I want to say 6 of them. And
Amazing.
we're
Yeah.
doing our next one in Oaxaca, which is this October, which is very exciting. And then we're also doing a trip the one we just announced yesterday is a trip to Savannah, Georgia, looking at different aspects of Creole culture and
Hmm.
delicious food and going on midnight moonlight cemetery tours and all sorts of things like that.
Very cool. Death takes a holiday.
You're
Couldn't
hired, man.
resist. Sorry.
I know. I think we're gonna have a lot of
Let-
opportunity during this talk.
Well, thank you so much. Let's bring Beth back
Okay.
and get some questions from the audience, but I'm going to be quiet and thank you, Joanna, and say that I'll see you at Memento Mori on Saturday.
It's so nice to be here and thank you for having me, Matt. And it's great to see you again. And thanks for hosting me, Alta.
Delighted to host you. Thanks for and if you haven't yet, I'll pop a link in the chat. Also, read Lydia's article all about morbid anatomy and the upcoming event in
Thank
LA.
you.
All right, so questions for you, Joanna. What, just personally speaking, how have your, since beginning kind of morbid anatomy, how have your thoughts about your own mortality changed and evolved over the course of your work?
It's a great question. I think I'm much less afraid of death than I used to be. I think in a way, morbid anatomy was my way of working through my fear of death. And now I can honestly say I'm not afraid of it.
What
And
do
I
you
could
think
say this
happened?
honestly. What's that? Well, I think what happened for me, and this is what I'm trying to share in the book as well, is my background is history. So using the lens of history and looking at the ways in which people around the world used to deal with death or still do in different ways, and kind of living in different places as well, and thinking, okay, if I had been brought up in Bolivia, if I'd been brought up in Hungary, if I'd been brought up in Mexico, how might I think about death differently? Even just seeing how culturally relative our fear of death really is kind of taught me, um, taught is the wrong word, but kind of viscerally made that fear going away. That's one part of it. And I would say, I think another part is it forced me to start living the life I wanted to. So I feel one of the things I talk about in the book is I love traveling, but I hate flying, and I'm really afraid of
Mhm.
flying. And so I used to be so bad, it's not that quite that bad anymore, that I would be in line and I would stare and I'd watch the people filing on, and I couldn't help but like imagine how they'd act if the plane just took a nosedive. Like that kind of obsessive thought, right? I know, but I love travel, so I wasn't going to let it stand in my way. So by way of dealing with this from the time I was maybe like 13 on, is I'd sit there on the plane, I'd close my eyes and I'd say, okay, if I die on this flight, what would I have done differently? And I've been doing that for so long. And then I've been changing my life in accordance with that, that I feel like if I died now, I'd be okay. I'm living exactly the life I want to live. I'm not waiting to do anything. So to me, I'm kind of just at peace. I feel like I'm not gonna say my age, but I'm over 50, let's say that, and I've had really good years, and if this is it, I don't want it to be it. Going back to Matt's earlier comment, this is not a suicide cult. I don't want to die tomorrow, but if I did, I'd be okay with it. I love my life. I'm doing exactly what I want to do with my time on earth, and I really, really, really do think that contemplating the brevity of life is what allowed me to make those choices now, to take the risks to live the life I wanted to live and not live the way my mom might think I should live, right? Or my dad or my culture, really both kind of clarifying my own values, but then also having the courage to take chances and live them out.
That's so funny that you say that about flying. Before we went live, we were talking about I'm also terrified to fly. And I look at people boarding a plane and just think of I can push that person out of the way to get
You're
just
more of a
kidding.
badass than I am, clearly.
Okay, more questions. Leslie asks, do you cover shared death experiences in your book?
Shared death experience?
I
I don't
don't
know
know
what
what
that
that.
is. Near death experience, I know. I don't know shared
All right,
death.
well, I don't know what shared death
Well,
experience.
sounds like a sequel.
But if you've got a second to clarify what that means, but what about near death experiences?
I do talk about near death experiences in the book. Yeah. So the book is organized into 12 chapters. I should also say the book is, if any of you, and maybe some of the listeners and watchers out there might know a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. This book was based in a way inspired by The Artist's Way. So it's 12 chapters, and each chapter is devoted to a different aspect of death. And one chapter is called What Happens When We Die. And in that chapter, I do talk about near death experiences, and specifically what are called veridical near-death experiences. These are really fascinating. I don't know if you guys have heard about these. So this is when someone is legally dead, their heart isn't operational, their brain isn't operational. And when they come back, when they're revived, they report having seen things that can then be verified by witnesses that they couldn't possibly know. So, and they're saying that they're seeing it from a perspective. Yeah, there's a huge literature on this in the scientific
Wait,
circle.
they're seeing what people working on their bodies
Yes,
in the operating
exactly.
room or whatever. Okay.
Crazy stuff.
Taking
Like,
their wallet out of their pocket.
on some occasions, probably yes. That didn't make it into the literature I saw, but it's often also doctors or nurses who are verifying this. So these are not just like, people who have something invested in trying to perpetuate some fiction. It's really, really compelling and fascinating stuff.
Okay. All right. Leslie's clarified. So by shared death experiences, she means it's when you are with someone when they are dying and experience their death with them, in a sense. When my father passed, I was in the room with him along with my aunt and sister and saw his spirit or some kind of apparition move across his body and out of his forehead. I actually have heard of this in our own family. I call it the big whoosh. I'm sure you haven't heard of that since I made up that description. But that's what she's talking about, I think, by
Yeah.
being there when someone else passes.
Absolutely. And what that makes me think of is, so I taught a class for many years at Morbid Anatomy. I started it right when the lockdown began, because I began to see this as a time in which people needed some way of looking death in the eye. All these people stuck at home, rather than let's avoid it, let's talk about it. So I started this class, and many of my students over the times I taught this class talk about wanting to be death doulas. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard of death doulas. These are people that they're kind of like midwives, but they help people through the other end. They help people transition in a positive way from life into death. And what's interesting about shared death experiences is pretty much every person I spoke to who wants to do this line of work, my husband included, he's a death doula, talk about this experience of ushering someone through death, and how moving and powerful, and what a gift. Almost without a fail, they say it felt like a gift or an honor, and that's how they want to spend their life. And people even do compare it to watching someone be born, like that feeling of awe and wonder. And it's very counterintuitive to how we've been taught to think about death, but that's how most people that I've spoken to have ushered someone through a death speak of it, is this shared death experience. So yes, very much so.
We've done a couple of articles actually about that in Alta, but groups that a photographer that will come and capture like the last moments of someone's life, a singing group that will come and sing as someone passes.
Lovely.
Okay, more questions. What is your idea to overcoming the fear of the end of one's material existence. I firmly believe in the afterlife. This is Kevin asking this, but the older I get, the more I deal with a sense of existential crisis that I will no longer be able to enjoy life in the body here on this earth.
Well, this was cheeky, but I recommend you read my book, because part of what the book is really trying to do is it's like a process more than a book. It's 12 weeks where there's text, and then each chapter has exercises and journal prompts to kind of help you excavate where your fears come from, and then try to see if there's some other way to look at it. So I would say, if you don't read my book, then some journal prompts where you try to write about, what exactly are you afraid of? What will you miss? Is there something you could do now so you would miss it less? Is there something you're afraid you're going to regret not having done? It sounds like maybe that might be part of what I'm hearing. But I think whatever it is, looking it in the eye and working with it, and so you can remedy it and feel at peace when it's time. And I'll go back and talk a little bit about death doulas. They've been doing this now professionally for a while. And what my husband tells me that I think is super interesting is they say basically what keeps people from dying a good death are are concerns that fall into 4 different categories: regret, unfinished business, guilt, and shame. And so if you can think that way, you don't need the book to do this, right? But just think about what are those, what is holding you back? What is it that you're afraid of giving up? And is there something you can do to remedy that? I think is the advice I would have.
Okay, wait, can you say those 4 things one more
That's
time?
thinking about it. Yeah, she's running through them in her mind.
No, and I'll tell you, there's a term for it too, which is how I remember it. They call it rugs. And thank you, Brian Malilo. He's the one who told me this. So regret, unfinished business, guilt, shame. And so another thing that death doulas do with people, which I think is lovely, is they help them create legacy projects so that people can kind of see the story of their life and maybe leave an oral history behind for their family. There's so many ways you can do it. And I'll add one other thing, just because I think it's really interesting. For the book, I also interviewed a contemporary shaman, and she wrote this book called The Encyclopedia of Shamanism. Her name is Christina Pratt, and she's done some stuff for Morbid Anatomy. She's fantastic. And so there's this concept, if you look at the history of death, of figures called psychopomps. And psychopomps are figures that help you transition. So a death doula is a psychopomp, but a psychopomp could also be a god in the ancient world, or a shaman, or many other figures serve this purpose. So Hermes in the ancient world was a psychopomp. Christ, something, was a psychopomp in a certain way. So when I asked her about this right at the beginning of COVID, she said that you don't need someone to help you transition if you lived your life to the fullest, essentially. So if you're constantly thinking to yourself, how might I live my life differently if I were to die tomorrow, and making changes in accordance with that, then you're living the life that you need to live without the regrets or the unfinished business, the guilt and the shame that's holding the other people back. If that makes sense. So not everyone needs this work, but if you have anxiety about death or something that you feel is holding you back, then it's worth trying to think about those things.
Okay, we're a little over time. I want to ask one more question on behalf of Carrie or Kari. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I noticed at the beginning of the Zoom, you mentioned a friend who had passed in quotes. And this is actually something we discuss editorially, the right words to use. Do you discuss the ways we avoid confronting death through alternate language? And do you have thoughts on using the more direct language like died?
I think they're all great words. I don't really feel like it's dodging personally, though I hear what you're saying. And I think there are a lot of euphemisms. But to me, I like past because it's a nod towards the fact that death is a mystery, right? That we don't actually know that death is an end, right? We know it's the end of the body. We don't know it's the end of everything. It might be, we just don't know. And I like past because I think it's a bit more open-ended, right? It's a sense of a movement from one thing to another. So in that way, I don't consider it an avoidance so much as a nod to the mystery of it. And I think there's something beautiful in the fact we really don't know what happens when we die. And the fact that we are sitting here on Zoom in a hugely technological world where we have so many things figured out, and we still don't know what happens when we die, I think is kind of a beautiful thing.
Rugs.
That's right.
This is
Regret,
my
unfinished business, guilt, and shame.
I mean, I'm just
It's all in
fascinated.
the book too, if you forget.
Okay,
There's, I
great.
try to kind of lead you through that process. That's really what the book is about.
I know what I'm getting Beth for Christmas.
Don't
Okay,
tell her that it was my idea.
folks, this interview has been recorded, and my wonderful colleague Liz has been dutifully taking notes, and we're going to send you links to all of this. Include Liz, I hope you got rugs. And we're going to shoot you an email with all of that later this afternoon or this evening. We're also going to post this interview to altaonline.com and include that in your email. We will have a link to go to the Morbid Anatomy event in LA on September 7th with your Alta discount code. You get a deal just by being down with Alta. So thank you so much, Joanna, for offering our friends
And
readers
tickets are almost sold out. So if you want to go, you
and
must.
it's almost sold out, so book it today, or else you won't get in. And so I'm so grateful to you, Joanna, for taking the time to do this, and to my wonderful colleague Matt for handling this interview. I want to invite everyone next week. We're going to take a quite a turn and discuss gibbons, apes, an ape conservation center in Santa Clarita, California. Which will be fascinating and interesting, and all about really cute looking apes called gibbons. We're going to learn all about those. So please do join us for that. That's Wednesday, September 11th here at Alta Live at 12:30. With that, I wish you all no regrets, no unfinished business, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.